Please become a Patreon and support the show. Merci.
And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
His plays have been performed at South Coast Rep, Actors Theatre of Louisville, Circus Theatricals, Jiva, and many other local and regional theaters. He has also been a writer for Warner Brothers, Disney, DreamWorks, and many other independent studios, and his stage plays have been developed at Sundance, Steppenwolf, Midwest Play Labs, and the Mark Taper Forum's New Works Festival. Shem Bitterman, welcome to Animal Farm.
Yeah, hi, welcome, Stephen.
There is much talk that may be true, maybe not, about how polarized we are and the inability of camps of people to have a civil conversation. That may be overstated, lest we forget this country has been through a civil war. And if you, that was quite a while ago, that was well over 100 years ago, and that was when people could not find any sense of shared values. So this may not be as new as it seems, and perhaps an argument could be made that the era where we seem to be able to have rational discourse was just an illusion, or if it existed, it was fleeting. But we are at a point where values really seem to be at odds, and even families can't have civil discussions anymore because of the nature of conversation that may or may not have been exacerbated by social media. Which brings us to, if that's true, and that would be the first question, if you believe it has gotten worse, or is that an illusion? If it's true, if it has gotten worse, is the theater and are the arts, can they be a vanguard, something that's possible to restore conversation and a belief in truth and in the power of words and the authenticity of words that just doesn't exist in, say, social media and even journalism, where in the political arena, when people make statements about what is going on, there is an extremely low level of trust. I think the New York Times did a survey, said that particularly the younger generation just has the confidence in the government that the government is telling the truth is down in the 30%. Wow. What is the role of theater in it? Is theater just another balloon that gets blown away in the wind, or can theater actually help? That's if you think it's true. So kind of two questions.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's certainly a lot to be said about the divisions among people, and I think that all of the status quo things that you named, like for example, journalism. People are exploring in journalism whether the concept of objectivity is real or racist. In other words,
yes.
And I think all these sort of authority kind of places that we look for stability in society, or where we go to for received truths like objectivity or government pronouncements or even science. I think all of those are under a powerful re-examination, a cultural re-examination right now. That's putting it kindly. Less kindly, you could say that they're under that they're all being questioned in ways that they're not used to being questioned, in ways where a scientist would say, "Hey, I'm a scientist," or a journalist would say, "Hey, I'm just being objective here," or telling the story. I think all of those things are being kind of called into question on both the left and the right.
Yes.
And probably for good reason. So that leaves the arts, and where do the arts sit in this paradigm? And obviously, I mean, one of the pieces that I read recently that I thought was terrific, it was a essay about Thomas Mann and his sort of support of, well, this is a little obscure, but it was essentially about two kinds of art, you know, the art of culture and the art of civilization. The art of civilization, as was posited by this article, was the art of kind of state-approved art. And I'm talking more about, let's say, the art of culture, meaning the awareness of where we are. And that is a place that we inhabit as artists. That,
Could we back up? I just wanted to get clarification. By state, could you just define what you mean by state-approved art? And does that exist? It's very clear it exists in authoritarian countries, but does it exist
I think it's naive to think it doesn't exist in America. For example, all Marvel movies are essentially state-approved art. There are so many filters between a Marvel movie and an audience. So much money is invested in making these things. So much money is invested in marketing these things that not one thing goes in front of the audience that isn't somehow reinforcing some sort of cultural message. I shouldn't use the word culture, some message of our self-definition of civilization, and a form of state art, a form of propaganda. So
it sounds like what you're saying is market-based more than government-based.
It's not government-based per se, but it's strongly influenced, I think, by policy. That doesn't mean to say that the government steps in and tells the studios what to produce or what not to produce, but what it does is it means that if you're, let's say, somebody who is an individual voice, and you try to go into a studio and do a Marvel franchise, your voice is going to be heavily edited, conditioned, and shaped. Yes, for market purposes, but all market purposes are essentially part of the civilizing aspects of the world in which we live. In other words, when you watch a football movie, for example, you're going to see a lot of car ads, and those car ads are going to be supported by a huge government infrastructure that promotes politicians who promote fuel subsidies and road subsidies. So whether you're aware when you're watching the commercial, when you're watching the football game and the commercial of the car ad, that you're part of a state sort of system, it's there. And it's similarly there in movies that promote expensive lifestyle choices, that promote 007 hops into a Ferrari. You're being marketed to, whether you're aware of it or not. And there was a very interesting examination back when they used to have that great film series at LACMA. They had Soviet anti-war movies or Soviet, actually no, it was Nazi war movies and American war movies. And essentially they were both propagandistic movies. One was definitely posited as this piece of entertainment from a free market system, and the other was talking about how this kid couldn't get accepted by his fellow Nazis in the Hitler Youth. And you emotionally attached in the same way to both storylines. In other words, neither of them was asking you in an ambivalent way to really examine the characters' motivations or to put them in the larger context of whether we should all be joining the Hitler Youth. It was more just, gee, isn't it too bad that this poor kid is misunderstood? He should really, have this opportunity to join the Hitler Youth, and people should understand that he's one of the gang.
Yeah, everyone should. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you watch an American movie and you're like, gee, isn't it too bad that this soldier is isolated by these other guys? But if once he rescues that woman, then they'll see that he's part of the team and that he really is accepted. And or a Disney movie, it's like suddenly, oh yeah, this kid who doesn't have a family, suddenly he has a family, and there isn't a deeper questioning. So that's on one side, and I do believe that those cultural norms are going to be increasingly challenged in the future because we're at an inflection point in culture where it's demanding that we start to pay attention to the society we're living in a responsive and responsible way. And so these kind of these quote unquote the divisiveness, which is really in a way of saying it's a kind of a discussion, but it could be a very emotional discussion, or it could be an irrational discussion, or a discussion that's frightening to people, or a discussion in which they're not saying what they're meaning. Where these kinds of discussions or discursiveness or oppositional impulses are going to be more and more brought to the forefront. But putting all that aside and talking about my understanding of playwriting and the arts, which is the subterranean world, which is the world that is not necessarily going to be greenlit as a Marvel movie, but is actually the expression of an individual voice. And that was essentially what Thomas Mann was defending in his writing and in his politics. And essentially that area, I think, is a very powerful way to address the thing that you're talking about, which is, can we find commonality? Because characters and, this opposition that you were talking about is essentially the red meat of drama. The polarization, true inability to meet in the middle is actually where drama lives. Drama doesn't live in discussion, nor does it live in discursiveness or in propaganda. It lives in true polarization. And you can go all the way back to the Greeks to see how deeply polarized those dramatic incidents were. Some were psychologically based, some oppositional positions were psychologically based, some were ideologically based. But the point is that until you bring true polarity onto the stage, true divisiveness, you haven't even found a drama. You really need to find the place at which people violently disagree to begin to find the place where drama lives. And so then why do you put this incredible discursiveness or this polarization onto the stage? Why do it? And I feel that you do it because when you look at polarization, when you step back from it and examine it as an audience might, as a theater goer might, or when you inhabit it as an actor would when you're playing one of those polarized roles, you're essentially applying a certain objectivity. You may not be fully aware of it, but there's an objectivity that you bring to the theater. You bring an identification for sure. Like you are identifying with one or several of the characters or points of views, but you're also standing apart from it. You're aware that you're not in the living room with those people. You're sitting in a seat. There's a frame around the stage. And one of the great things about theater is that when the lights go up, it's a new beginning. And so you're struggling to understand in these polarized voices or polarized positions, where's the truth? Or what's happening? What's going on beneath this? You're the audience from the beginning of a play, and hopefully it continues throughout the play. I think in the best plays it does. You're trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this guy taking this difficult position? Why doesn't he just love this girl that really seems to want to? And why now is she suddenly now that he finally has fallen in love with her, why is she turning away from him? And you're digging deep into these characters' polarized motives, and
you're in a kind of jury box. You're in a kind of jury box.
Yeah, but it's even better than a jury box in the sense that you're actually in a really great play. Your emotions are playing ping pong, meaning you're bouncing to her side, you're bouncing to his side. Now you're going to argue with him. Now wait, no, she has a point. And this is what opens the mind.
Yes.
This is the key to go through the polarization into an understanding of the situational reality and an embracing of the paradox. Because people don't like to admit this, but life is paradoxical. It's not clear. Yeah, everybody wants a clear answer, like, oh yeah, well that, of course, naturally, there's a pandemic. Of course you should take a vaccine. Naturally. Why wouldn't you? It's a life-saving thing. But actually, everything is complicated. Paradox exists everywhere. I had a friend who had a great insight into this, and he goes, you know, people put the stop signs at places not because it's clear that you should stop, but because it's not clear what you should do. So think of the theater as a place where you take the stop sign away.
Yeah.
And suddenly two people arrive at an intersection. And that intersection is what a writer tries to find. They really try to inhabit both sides of an argument.
Can you cite any, not getting into the weeds of Greek drama, but are there characters and situations that support what you're saying?
Yeah, so Antigone, that's a perfect example. I mean, they both have perfectly articulate. In fact, the Greek drama was the articulation of these polarized, impossible positions. Yes. On one hand, people are like, Antigone, just forget about it. The guy's dead. He doesn't need to go in the ground. This is all bullshit. And Antigone's like, what are you talking about? This is my brother. You know, if I do nothing else in my life, I have to honor my brother. Yeah. And now Creon is like, why are you making things so difficult for me? I just ended a war. I'm trying to rule this city in a benevolent way, in an honest way. I can't honor a person who opposed me. It would undermine my authority. Yeah. And what you have here is a beautifully articulated argument that is perfect polarization. And then the Greeks in their brilliance, they have the crowd, you know, and they're kind of comic in the best of them, and they're sort of going, they're basically doing what the audience in modern theater is doing. What the hell is going on here? Why is this guy so different? Well, on the other hand,
there's always on the other hand,
back and forth, and it's like that's the way. That's the best theater. The best theater is not where you only hear Creon's point of view, and this is what I mean by propagandistic theater or propagandistic. 007, you know, there's one bad guy. He's really going to destroy the world this time. It's going to be really bad. He hates puppies. He kills, you know, little kids. Yeah. And 007, you're going for this dude. You're going to get this guy. 007, you're great. Doesn't matter that you drive a gas burning car. Doesn't matter that you could give a shit about the environment or that you blow up half the city of Paris. The main thing is you get this puppy hater. And that's insulting to an audience.
Hold on.
Similarly, just to finish the thought, similarly, when you have a play that just basically says what everybody should think about a thing, you know, and you just have Creon, and he's just like, hey, here's Creon's point of view. Antigone's an idiot, and you know, now all you people in the theater agree with Creon because you're also intelligent people. Well, that's also not theater, really.
Right.
It's a kind of propaganda, and it's boring.
I have 2 points. One is a tiny one, and one is a big one. The tiny one that is very interesting is that the prior play, which was Oedipus the King, Creon shows up as Oedipus's brother-in-law. Oedipus was married to Jocasta, and Creon is Jocasta's brother. And in that play, Creon is totally the voice of reason. He's between the two. And yet when he gets his own play, he takes the position of one of the extreme poles.
I think here's what's wrong with our current discourse is that the media, and this is, I had mentioned that I might have a little pushback on this idea that of polarization and what polarization really is. The media would like to present polarization as, because of this stop sign concept, because people look at things and they want a clear answer, then they stand on one side of a polarized situation and they say, well, obviously this is the truth. But the reality is Creon is pretty reasonable in Antigone. He's not a crazy.
Yeah.
She's not a crazy. And so what we're calling polarization today is not actually crazy. It's just a lack of respect for one another.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lack of respect. You know, my favorite historical figure, oddly, is Lincoln. And the thing that I love about Lincoln is he was a self-taught lawyer, which meant that he was just a guy who sat around thinking about a lot of shit. And he used to have to think quite a lot about things because there was no television or anything. And he was a lawyer, and he would go through these fields, these huge rides that he would take between towns. And it might take him 4 hours on this buckboard wagon to go from town to town. And he'd go through arguments in his head about slavery, about Supreme Court decisions. And the cool thing about Lincoln is he internalized the opposite point of view. So, and in all of his speeches, in all of his debates, he would always say the other person's point of view.
Yeah.
And what that did, before he would say his own, and he did it as a lawyer too, and what that did is it made people feel heard. And I think that what we really lack now is an ability for people to feel heard. So if you go to the theater and you go there and you go, wow, I might be to the right, I might be to the left, but in this play right now, sitting in this room, I feel by this playwright or this performance, these performances, I feel heard. I heard myself. And I've had this experience over and over again with plays of my own and other people, where you take an audience, you know, like Bible Belt Christians or whatever, and everybody goes in to have the same experience, and they come out having discussions about the play because somehow or other they found something within the play, somewhere within the play, that they felt heard. And so when I look at politicians today and pundits, I think, why don't you just listen to what the other people have to say? Just listen and reflect back what you've heard as a means of opening a dialogue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think so that's just a pushback on the idea that Creon is unreasonable. I think they're both unreasonable and reasonable, and it's very paradoxical, and that's what makes the play great.
Those are the flaws. The other thing I want to mention is,
yes, they call them flaws.
the hubris is the flaw.
And it was great, this concept of hubris, this idea that people who are committed to a point of view are their great era as human beings is that they don't commit, that they are inflexible.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where their hubris comes. So I would say we're having a crisis of inflexibility right now.
To some degree, and you use as your example the kind of the Superman model that's going against the enemy of the people, the bad guy. But I just want to point out, there's a huge literary tradition for that, which our theater did not glob onto very much, at least in the 20th century when it was developing, but our movie industry did. And that's the medieval model that came out of the rubble of the Roman theater, which, Lucifer fell out of heaven and we have a separation of good and evil. And you have a lot of stories where there is this, it is not powerful, reasonable people having one polar argument versus a powerful person who has another. They are really good people and bad people, and the evil must be vanquished. And that is a medieval theology, and it's worked its way through our movies. It's worked our way through our video games. It's worked its way really through the most popular aspects of our culture. So our comic books are filled with that stuff. And so that is profoundly influential. And we don't use the Greek model, at least the popular culture does not use much of the Greek model. The hoity-toity playwrights, such as Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams, and even August Wilson, very much use a Greek model where good and evil reside within one heart. So that's a very powerful force that we're up against.
I think that part of why I love genre movies like noir films, horror films, is that they take a more they often take a more nuanced view of evil.
Yeah.
You know, and evil is something that fascinated me as a playwright for many years and still fascinates me. You know, what evil actually is. M. Scott Peck defines evil as people of the lie, people who are willing to preserve their own sense of self-image, trash or destroy somebody else, even their own child, even somebody that they love. And you know, interestingly, I think a case could be made that evil resides to some degree in inflexibility, you know, because the inflexible self-image, the inability to embrace, you know, the shadow side or the dark side leads to a degree of self-righteousness, which is a very Christian medieval concept. Somehow, you know, the Christian concept, one of the first serial killer books ever written was by a guy named Hogue. He was a farmer, an 18th century farmer, and he wrote about the elect. And he said that certain people, when they saw themselves as passing a certain theological threshold of goodness, could do no wrong. They were the elect. And then in this wonderful book, Hogue, you know, takes this character who's one of the elect in his own mind, or he is one of the elect, and he turns him into a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that goes and does all these crimes is somebody that this character doesn't identify as part of themselves. In other words, he's bifurcated from the part of himself that's actually doing all this killing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think evil often resides in this unreflected and staunchly held vision of oneself.
Well, let's go back to the Greeks then. To Creon walls up his niece Antigone. He that is a definite, that meets the very definition you're talking about, where you are killing somebody you love, and yet he's a voice of reason.
But he does it for practical purposes, meaning he's pragmatic. The interesting thing about the Greek protagonists and antagonists is they both had a high degree of pragmatism, but where pragmatism approaches overweening pride, that's where the sin of hubris comes. When you get into medieval theology, I feel like it tips even further to the point at which there's no longer any attempt at the reasonable or the pragmatic approach. It's just purely, I'm a good person, I can do no wrong. I can't be judged in that way. And yeah. So I mean,
you mean like our former president?
I mean, yes. I mean, he's a perfect example of somebody who has really resisted dramatic investigation. And I think if you read the Michael Wolff book, the last one, the last of his trilogy, that came as close as anybody could come to understanding who that guy was under his skin. But yeah, there are certain modern psychological types that really resist a dramatist, because the inner conflict that Creon evidences is no longer visible within these people.
Yes.
They've shut that inner dialogue out. There's no pain or suffering from walling off your niece. There's just do it. And it's all unexamined. But again, what I love about drama is that you can bring that kind of a character onto the stage, and then they function within a situation, meaning they can be an inflexible force that other characters have to work against in, say, a farce. They can also shed quite a lot of illumination in their dimness. Do you know what I mean? They can brighten things up just by their radical inflexibility. Trump would be a comic character in a drama, but
who is it? Orgon and Tartuffe is kind of like that. He's just so inflexible.
He's a mystery. He's a mystery, and then he's the kind of person which another friend of mine used to say about my plays. He used to say, well, I always know, I love your plays, he said to me, because when you're watching your plays, how people react tells me who they are. And that guy in Tartuffe, that's exactly, you learn a lot about the people by how they're reacting to the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so how people respond to Trump tells you who the people are, and that's where the drama lives.
Yeah.
And yet, as a dramatist, you're bringing on the Trump so that people can have something to react against, or the Tartuffe onto the stage. And it's great. He exposes their hypocrisy.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's always a great subject for a play.
Well, that's the satire part of it, which is quite different from the tragedy part of it. Where
yeah, I think those plays are more difficult to reach tragedy, because to find tragedy, you have to have dimensionality within every character. I was talking with a friend the other day about Ted Lasso, that Apple show, and there's so much dimensionality, even for two-dimensional characters at the beginning, and I've only watched the first couple, but there's a lot of dimensionality in the antagonist, in the woman who runs the soccer team, because you can identify with why she's doing what she's doing, and she's doing it for a good reason. I think the difference, obviously, in the case of our former president, is there's no more there, or Tartuffe, is that there's not a reason that they're doing it. There's no polarity that they're dealing with. They're fully committed. Yeah.
Shem Bitterman, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. This was fun.
Next week, we're joined by Mark Antonio Pritchett, who is a classically trained actor, singer, and stunt combatant with 20 years of professional experience. He's appeared on the small screen in such shows as The Privateers, JAG, Arrested Development with Jason Bateman, and The West Wing with Martin Sheen. On the big screen, some of his appearances include The Onion Movie, The Bacchae, Soldier of God, and Frost Portrait of a Vampire with Gary Busey. Locally, Mark has been on the stage at Theatre of Note, and he currently serves as co-artistic director of Sacred Fools Theatre.